And yet, now it's just good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hmm. How you doing, Elam?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah.
I got my coffee here and everything.
Look, I even have the right cup today.
Girl boss. I like it.
That's what's up.
See, let me see if I can find my camera this time. Whoa.
Oh my God. Have you been learning technology tips lately?
Well, I'm a slow learner, but that doesn't mean I don't learn.
I was just referring to the fact that you were technologically impaired.
You're going to grind that axe as long as you can, aren't you?
I'm gonna grind that axe forever and ever and ever and ever. That's a fact.
So I think we should keep up the tradition here of keeping this real light in the beginning for a while. Tell
That's
just funny stories and jokes. We should keep up the. What the heck? I can hear myself again now. Light in the beginning for a while. Tell just funny stories and jokes. What the heck? I can hear myself again now. Oh boy.
Hey, is it
Yes.
fixed now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. Thank you.
fantastic.
Can I just eat a
Huh.
cookie?
Can you eat a cookie? Why would you want to eat a cookie right now?
On the set? I'll give you a chance to talk. I don't want to
Give me
dominate the
a
conversation.
chance to talk. What are you talking about? Sometimes the boss just sits back and watches.
I can't do it without you. You've got to set the parameters for what's going to happen.
So, I mean, do you know what Bible verse I'm referring to when I say spare the rod?
Well, I couldn't tell you where it is in the Bible.
It's in the Proverbs like 13:24.
Really? You even know where it is? Wow.
He that spareth the rod hateth his son. Seriously.
That's some harsh shit there.
So here's my question. Um, you were older than I was, right?
Yeah, thanks for rubbing that in.
When
I'm
you,
like,
when
I'm
you,
like,
huh? What?
sorry, go ahead.
You're like what?
I'm like ancient.
No, what I'm saying is like for example, so I had the opportunity to get out when I was like 19, right? I was almost 20, but yeah, at 19. So like as such, like I wasn't a parent in the inside of the community. And for you, you were a parent inside of the community.
You just want to know if I beat my kids.
No, I just want to know if like you had troubles with your kids and you talked to the Brady Hut or, you know, the elder and they told you like spare the rod and spoil the child. Like this whole idea that the stricter you are, the more pious you are and the more hope there is for your soul, and that's better in the long run.
Well, I was old order, practicing old order, and had kids, and yeah, I did. Um, I remember, I have this vivid memory of my son Lamar being, squirming and unhappy, and some other kid had just been taken out and came back in, just clinging to the parent and sniffling um, and I don't know, but my assumption was that he had spanked him, you know, into whatever. I don't know if you can spank him into submission or not, but anyway, so I took my son out, And the question was, what am I going to do? Um, and what happened is I got out to the cow stable, and it was a beautiful early summer, spring day or whatever. And the second I put him down, he just was instantly happy, and he was, he could walk, but he was toddling around, and I just let him go a while, and that's all it took, is just get him out of that stuffy, confined environment and let him run around a little bit, and we went back in, and it was fine. And I was conscious that I'm not towing the line of what I kind of assumed was expected, sort of preach from the pulpit that um, something about breaking the child's will. I couldn't say the German or Pennsylvania Dutch language used, but that's the story of me sort of being a good guy. It's not that clear cut for me. I I did I did sort of really take that step of, hey, not just using violence to, I don't know what what it's supposed to
Well,
be for, but I also uh, had this thing where if certain things happened that were just sort of beyond the pale, that I would spank my kids, and it was this series of things that I remember, and I think it was associated with problems in our relationship between my then wife and I. And but what happened is, the first time that I remember this is the kids were playing in the backyard, and I was right there with them, and my oldest son held a hammer over the top of uh, his brother's head and just let it drop plonk right down on his head. And I was just like beside myself. And I spanked him, and there was another incident where there were apples. They played with apples. We'd gotten a bushel or a half a bushel of apples, and they played with them like a toy, like they had them all out on the grass in the gutter, and there were there were ants on them. Anyway, I started picking them up, and I realized they should help pick them up. So I went and got my son to help me pick them up, and he refused to pick the ones up with ants on them. And anyway, there was so there was another scene where um,
so
I let me finish my story, Mary, please. So there was another scene where he was again interacting with Stephen, and Stephen got hurt, and I caught myself and stopped, and I explained to him that it's my responsibility to teach him values and discipline him when he's beating up his little brother, and that me hitting him, spanking him is not appropriate, and I apologized for it, and I anyway. So I just want our listeners to know that this is not something that I'm speaking down from a ivory tower of dictating how kids should or parents should raise their kids. Um, and it was a journey, but the thing that maybe to remember about that is, by that time I was um, I was attending the Unitarian Universalist Church at that time, so I had exposure to ideas that were rejected this ideology of spare the rod, spoil the child, and that there's other ways of doing that, and that there's consequences for using violence to discipline. Anyway, that's I just wanted to sort of go through that and explain that.
so here's a question that I have for you is that would you agree that within your old order Amish community, were you ever taught any other method of discipline? Because, like, also, I want our listeners to know that I personally have also failed my child, and like I have spanked my child. Again, kind of in the similar situations what Elam was describing, but at the time that was the only tool that I knew of, and it was once I kind of evolved past that. The way that I did that is through I actually took several parenting classes because I realized what I was doing was not okay, and that was pretty much the same thing as what happened within the community in a way, as far as like spanking your child. Um, I think that there's a lot of people that advocate for spanking a child in a way that ends up creating these situations where all people know and all they know how to do is to spank their child. And that is literally the only way that they know how to discipline their child. So, how do you move past that? Because I deeply regret that whole thing. Good morning, Judge Me Unforgiven. But I mean, like, how do you move past that as a person? Like, you get out of the community, but you can take the Amish out of the community, but you can't take the Amish out of the person. And if only all the tools that you have ever been given are literally to beat your child into submission. Like when I babysat my nieces and nephews, it was like, oh, the child acts out. Well, you pinch their ear, or you put them in the corner, or you spank them. Like those were like literally the only options that I was given. And so like it's like you're set up for failure. So how do you move past that? And for me, that involved like really looking inward and also taking parenting classes and being honest about how I was parenting. How did I wish to parent? And what tools do I have in my toolbox to better parent my child?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I want to hopefully really focus on and clarify here is that humans are on a trajectory. You know, we used to be subservient to kings, and this is still the case. That I think corporal punishment was accepted, universally in schools in this country not so long ago, and I guess the point that I really want to focus on is that there's a big difference between um, failing, like I would have finally come to terms with that my use of spanking was a failure of parenting, and seeking a different way, versus what is taught in these plain communities where spanking is a form of piety. It's how you express your allegiance to, being a good, compliant person, and that's what I really want to get at. In part of why we're talking about this is because of the case in Missouri where this 4-year-old child was murdered, but pre that happening, having just this horrific experience of being subjected to physical violence, according to reports, all over their body. So this is a very important discussion to how do we get to a place where we try to move away from that form of discipline that was, it was accepted not so long ago, and and this is the problem with the plain community ideology. They pride themselves on the fact that they are still adhering to those old concepts, and while many of them don't murder their kids, there's this ethos of acceptance that violence is an appropriate form of punishment. And so I guess for me, what the objective here is to talk about and define ideas of how a moderation, if a moderate influence, can get into those plain communities to balance out this ideology that basically end up killing a child.
So here's we have a comment from one of our viewers talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses always drag children to the back of the hall and beat them if they didn't sit still in the meetings. And Judge Me Unforgiven says it's based on the concept of don't spare the rod. But I think like part of what you're saying is that we are in a community where when you talk about it, acceptance, it's there's acceptance. I don't think it's just acceptance and pride in the humility of like um, we are still adhering to that form of discipline, but there's also a encouragement of that to have pride in still using that concept as a form of discipline, like as the primarily the only form of discipline. Would you
Yeah,
agree with that?
yeah, they pride themselves on, it's their a mark of distinction for them. It's their how they define themselves, that they're different from the evil world, is we beat our kids. And
S-
my hope for the work that we are doing is to form formulate ideas that will allow and will allow for and introduce moderate ideas into these communities, and hold them accountable for this ideology. I think the online chatter is about the murder in Missouri. Is that, well, it wasn't us, or they weren't really Mennonite anymore, but the fact is that there's a fetish for religious freedom that encourages this kind of reactionary behavior that is just it's 15th century ideology that has no modern moderating content, and that's what we need. um, I don't have any well-developed ideas of what it's going to look like to introduce that, but I think a starting place is we have to acknowledge the problem. We have to say, yes, not everybody murders their kids because they believe in uh, spare the rod, spoil the child, but there's this extremism that is, there's no, one of the ways I describe it is that there's no in the plain communities, there's no evolutionary sort of grappling with enlightenment principles. There's no reform. There's no progressive reform. There's a reform, but the only reform that's acceptable or acknowledged is regressive, to be more strict, to be more medieval, to be just to embrace spare the rod, spoil the child, with pride. and and my sort of contribution to this is I want to ask those communities that believe in that dial that back, to take responsibility for this, that they are a part, they're complicit in an ideology that harms children.
So
Um,
so let me just say to our viewers, if you're not familiar with this case that Elam's referring to, there was a 4-year-old child that was sexually assaulted and beaten, was black and blue from the neck, was put under ice cold pond water in Missouri, and died. After the child died, the father called 911. They arrested 2 adults, Ethan Mast and I forget the female's name, on second-degree counts of murder, and then they arrested the parents on Christmas Eve, James and Mary Mast. And part of the reason that we're talking about this is because Mary Mast was demonized by the religion. The religion itself created the situation where it allowed people and gave people the freedom to demonize her. And as such, quote, they were trying to remove the demons from the child and the mother and the children. Like there were 3 children in the home, 2 of which were being assaulted regularly over a period of at least 2 weeks. It's absolutely horrifying. And I can't really wrap my head around, as a parent, your child's running around the kitchen table asking for help and you do not help them. I don't understand. But in a way, you have to also understand that if you can't wrap your head around that, that means you're incapable of that kind of behavior, and that's a good thing. But to our listeners, I'm trying to explain this because, one, a lot of people don't understand that even though the religion is sitting there and saying, well, they've kind of washed their hands of it. They've taken away any of the responsibility they had in creating this situation where these people are feeling empowered to do these things. When the fact of the matter is they've been in a religion most of their lives or all of their lives that has condoned and encouraged physical harm of a child. And we're talking about a 4-year-old. What 4-year-old do you know that is a demon child? Come on. Not okay.
yes, that's that. The other thing that I'd like to add to this is that this violent abuse of these children, and it was just it sounds like it was just a horrific mess of the mother and the father, and at least the child who was murdered were beaten daily with objects, black and blue marks all over their body. And it's hard for me to fathom that there was nobody in their orbit who, in their community, that didn't see there was something going on out of hand. And this extremism.
This is what the
It,
community did.
yeah, well, but the argument I want to make is that the community set these people up in teaching them that beating a child is a good thing. There's a church here in Lancaster County, one of the conservative churches, that has a room in church called the spanking room. And this is not some secret. They are proud of it. And so my point is that this tragedy has deep roots in the ideology that it arose from, and the plain communities have a responsibility to mediate their ideologies, to avoid these situations, to make it so that when it starts going off the rails, that it's somebody steps forward, whether it's a person outside that orbit or the parent, one of the parents. Why couldn't the mother at some point, an hour or two earlier, call for help.
Okay, let me tell you why the mother didn't call for help. Again, I don't understand why she didn't, but I can tell you why she didn't. Because inside of that community, her rights, her autonomy don't exist. I don't see it as an excuse, but it's a form of brainwashing. Because if you, as a woman, are to do everything your husband says or whatever freaking man is in your life and over control of you, you don't have any rights. You're a second class citizen. And when you start talking about, I'm being abused, my kids are being abused, you know what happens? They call you a liar. They disregard everything you said and they do nothing, nothing to freaking help you. Nobody cares within the community when you're being abused.
And
And they
probably
tell you to go forgive them because, you know, forgiveness is everything. So let's forgive my abuser for freaking. No, that's not
can I
okay.
just add something there? Not only does nobody respond within the community, the police usually are very feckless and useless in these situations. Now, of course, now there was a dead body. Oh my God! Now they can step in. But as Mary said, if anybody there would have called the police a day earlier,
Well, he's
guess what they
this.
would have done? Like
Nothing.
95% of these cases, nothing is done, and the perpetrators step up their abuse because somebody dared to introduce heathens, to reached out to heathens for help. Anyway, this is a hot subject. I wish we'd be getting some questions from our viewers, but
Well, I mean, Judge Me Unforgiven said, I remember my mom had that don't spare the rod scripture on a sheet of paper on the wall in the kitchen. And when you think about that, how different is that really from the plain communities? It's the
it's
kind of
not.
stuff that they do. That's
Yeah.
exactly what they do. It's brainwashing.
Uh,
It's
I just wanted to point out, and I'm going off of your take on the news, that the mother of the victim was charged with first-degree murder. Is that
yep.
is that is that right? And the father wasn't. And that's a sexist sort of adjudication here, because when you factor in the degree which women are subjugated and do not have a voice and have been trained to be submissive and to not question and reach out for help and object to what they're being subjected to, it's definitely a miscarriage of justice on the outside to charge her with murder and not the father. The father was of anybody who should have had the impetus to stop this. The father was the one with the most power, and he didn't. And so it's just it's a miscarriage of justice to charge the mother and not the she has greater charges against her than and I want to just dig into that a little bit. The mother reportedly uh,
So,
held the child underwater, but she was doing it to remove a demon from the child, which is a practice that is condoned by these communities. She was just doing the pious thing that her community teaches them to do. And so anyway, these are just it's just a messed up situation. But what I think is important is to hold these communities accountable for the ideology that they promote, and 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 then want to wash their hands of the fact when something really goes off the rails. And go ahead, Mary.
I just want to point out, so what they did is they charged Mary and James both with one felony, but then they a felony A. endangering the welfare of a child in the first degree, resulting in death. However, James's second charge is a felony B versus Mary's second charge is also a felony A. So what they did is they put the charges, the first charge is exactly the same. The second charge is lowered for James, when in fact he literally was the one who had the authority as the head of the household within like a community like that. He should have been the one held more accountable.
Yeah, there's no
huh?
There's no question he had more power to intervene than anybody else.
Yeah. Exactly. And so if you see that second one, it's a felony B. And that's the one that is like, why? No, why does he get a felony B when literally, like, no. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the structure within the church like you have the man, the head of the household, and then you're supposed to go to the deacon, the ministers, and the bishop is over the entire church. And you can
Right.
always seek counsel from the elderly men in the community too, but it's not so much women, but you go ask counsel of the elderly men.
Yeah, there's no question that this structure, he is the most culpable in the people that are sort of generally considered victims here. He's the most culpable. The women are absolutely drilled into submission and executing that, not questioning their husband or the male authority in the community is like the highest virtue a woman can live up to.
This is why I was a bad Amish person.
And thank God for that.
I'm just saying, I couldn't do it. I couldn't freaking do it. I couldn't be, no. You want me to be submissive to you because you're a man? No. But in the same token, these women have lived that way their entire lives. They don't know anything better than that. They don't know that they have choices. They don't know that they don't have to live like that. They don't even know that they have other ways of parenting other than beating their kids like these people in charge in the church perpetuates and encourages. They don't know. I personally believe they all need parenting classes. And I'm not talking about parenting classes created by the damn churches. It should be a secular parenting class. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's it's not that they don't know. It's any sign of seeking a disciplinary structure that tries to minimize spanking is considered some liberal devil worship. So
witchcraft,
yeah,
demonization.
So the problem is that they are proud of their adherence to this.
Did you see the post by like some guy named Steve Stutzman or something where he like
Stutzman?
Yes.
Stutzman.
Steve Stutzman. Okay, he basically said that all of this is the result of witchcraft. And I'm like, how can you be so blind? Like, this has nothing to do with witchcraft. This has nothing to do with demonization. What it has to do with is a community, a church that set up this situation and extolled, like they put out these virtues of beat your children into submission, beat your wives into submission, beat your women into submission. And they set the stage for these people to kill somebody, to kill a child. That's what they did. I don't care who, and by the way, if there were other inappropriate sexual relationships in regards to this case, that has Nothing to do with this case. That is completely separate. It has nothing to do with this case. Those were adults. We're talking about the sexual abuse, the beating of a child, putting a child under ice cold water in the middle of freaking winter in Missouri on a cold ass day, and not helping children.
And then just leaving them on the bank. This is just some really gruesome stuff. But I'd like to talk about a couple other cases with just unbelievably tragic consequences. And what I want to focus on is the extent which these situations, like the Missouri murder, went on for a horrific length of time. Now, the Missouri case, what we are told is, this was like 2 weeks of, beatings and just crazy stuff. But there's these other cases. I'm getting some reverb, Mary, if you know how to fix that. There's a couple other cases. There was one here in Lancaster County. It went through the court system, was adjudicated, and it was known as the child gifting case, in which some former Amish parents basically handed their entire family over to a child predator. And he had, before intervention happened, there were 2 children born to the oldest girl prior to her being 15 years old. So, just horrific depravity. But the point that I want to make about all these cases is that the story of those parents was years and years and years in the making. And what's sort of stunning to me is that no one, either in the Amish community or the outside community, the non-Amish world, intervened. And it's just mind-boggling to me that that kind of isolation can occur, and I think it's twofold. I think people knew that bad stuff was going down, and they just did not act. But also, the Amish community sets up these situations. Once these parents didn't comply with old order values and behavior, they excommunicated them. And this couple's excommunication was particularly stark, not only because of the specifics of the excommunication, but the father had a very thriving business in which he hired over like a dozen Amish workers. And the second the church didn't feel he was complying, the church literally came in one Monday morning. His workers were gone. And so he had a loan from the church. He had a property. He lived on a property where his business was, so he couldn't pay his mortgage. He had no means of income. He couldn't transfer. He couldn't just hire non-Amish workers. He could have in theory, but it's really tough to make that switch. So he lost his business. They lost their home. And they actually took their case all the way to the Supreme Court trying to get redress, and they fucking didn't get none. So there's this abandonment of these people, where, remember, this is the case that culminated in this horrific, child gifting case. But if there would have just been some compassion, some level of intervention where these people would not have gotten so isolated and then fell under the spell of this predator, and there's many ways of sort of talking about this, but let's think about it in the incarceration costs, to the public cost of jailing 3 people for the purpose, probably in for close to life. I think the mother is out now, but that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's like over $100,000 a year just right there, and so you quickly, and that's just incarceration. You look at the state probably floated counseling for these children and prosecution costs and social worker costs. But think of the money we could have saved if they would have just assigned a social worker to this family like 10 years before it happened. It's just mind-boggling. That, and the point I want to try to make is that the non-Amish world and the official Amish world, are complicit in creating these circumstances that have just unbelievable detrimental consequences that aren't going to stop just because they jailed a couple people. These kids, children who were born through a minor and a sexual predator who's going to spend the rest of his life in jail, what's the social cost of that?
Well, and not to mention, like, even if they were still within the Amish communities, these kids. So first off, the daughters that were gifted, if they were actively participating in part of an Amish community, they would be a second-class citizen. They would never regain like status. They would not have the ability to marry well. They would not have the ability to be any kind of person to be looked up to. They would always be whispered about behind behind the hands and gossiped about and looked down upon as a slut. These kids did not ask for any of that, but that's the reality. And then when you start talking about all of that, like, you're really addressing like the long-term ultimate effects. And also, let me point out, so this Jessica's murder case that we have been referring to, they are not Amish community. I believe they're former Mennonites, from what I've been able to gather, maybe Charity. I'm not exactly clear on that, but I do know that they are former Plain community members.
Yeah, the child gifting case is a really stark illustration of, the part of the problem was that this couple was so naive. They were and they got abandoned by their communities, and I feel that what's really sort of sticks in my craw, if you will, is that the Amish are known worldwide as a community that takes care of each other. And where were they? And it's not just their fault. It's but we can talk about that a little bit more. The level of education they got, the level of sort of streetwiseness that these parents would have had, and they're live this incredibly sheltered life. And then when things go wrong with the church and they get kicked out, they're incredibly vulnerable for exactly what happened. And we as a society can do better. It's costing us dearly not to do better on these situations.
It is.
And how much time do we have? We're probably almost out of time here.
14 minutes.
Well, and to just quickly refer to another case a little bit was the Bergholz beard cutting case, where and there's so many angles to explore about this. The Bergholz community started because this pious, righteous young minister wanted to do the only thing that is condoned by the Amish community in terms of reform, which is to be stricter. He moved to this isolated community to start a new community where they were going to be stricter and adhere to these values with more piety and devotion and commitment. That's the whole point of what he did. And that's what it means to be Amish.
Can I Can I say
Go ahead.
something?
Go ahead.
Like, can I just point out that, like, in one of the conversations that we've had earlier, Elam and I were discussing this case, and one of the things that we talked about is the fact that part of the problem within the plain communities is when you have something like that, somebody that wants to be stricter and adhere to more pious things, like, if it's not accepted in the community that you're in, there's no discussion about it. Just like there's no discussion about using other principles for parenting versus beating your children or spanking them or whatever. Like, there's no discussion about it. There's no room. The ministers, the bishop, the deacons, they all get together in what's called a Dienelversameling twice a year. They rewrite the Ordnungsbrief, and that is the rules of your community. And if you don't agree with it, you have to go somewhere else and find a community you agree with. Thank you.
And anyway, the Bergholz community just devolved into this horrific debauchery that again cost the state enormously. And yet the worst part of the problem is the state's response, which was the Amish community at large was begging the state to come and help. And it's so completely convoluted and twisted. The Amish community is not supposed to go to the world for help. Why can't young people go to college? Because, well, that would be helpful. Oh, no, that's bad. But in this case, it was perfectly okay for the United States government to bring a federal case of hate crimes against these perpetrators. And it ended up in so many people going to jail that 50 minors were orphaned. The entire ministry team of this community was jailed for 7 years. The bishop just got out now, like 10, 11, 12 years later, they released him because of COVID, I think. Maybe they didn't. I think he filed for it. Anyway, and this is just a wreck of a disaster of a social situation. And we don't have a lot of time, but I just want the Amish were completely helpless to remediate this situation. And so they run to the state, oh, please help us. And horror of horrors, the state complied. And I am 100% certain that they made the situation worse. And to bring this back to what we started talking about is the Amish community can't process their problems in a way that the only thing available in their toolbox is to be stricter. And then when things go off the rails because somebody is insanely strict and turns into a maniacal egomaniac, they don't know how to fix it, because by that time this guy's the bishop and nobody can touch him. And we need some progressive reform in that context. And instead of this horrible case among many now prompting progressive reform to remediate some of these failure of ideas, that's not happening, and that's what we're calling for.
Well, there's also that, like, for example, like if somebody were to come into an Amish community and they were to offer, like, completely free of charge, like a parenting class, to all the parents in the community, how many of them do you think would actually be allowed to attend in the first place? So number one, they wouldn't be allowed to attend because, again, it would be considered to be of witchcraft or Satanism or, demonization or whatever, other out there thing that they have. Like, it would be one of those things. However, there is no space for any of that, and that is an important thing that needs to be put out there, because, like, in this case, like, there needs to be a really hard look at, like, the communities behind these people who committed these atrocious crimes. And I believe that everybody in the freaking community needs to go have an actual parenting class that doesn't promote spare the rod, spoil the child. I think that would be a good start. I also think that the community itself, like these plain communities, a lot of them need to actually learn that when somebody brings them, you know, new, like somebody brings them the issue of sexual abuse, number one, start listening and start believing them, because it's been proven over and over that at least at a minimum, over 93% of people that report sexual assault are actually sexually assaulted. So stop saying they're lying, stop all of this victim blaming, stop all of this silencing them, that it's not okay. And telling them to forgive their perpetrator or their crime is just as bad as the perpetrators. Really unacceptable.
Thank you, Mary. That's really important stuff. The communities need to take on this responsibility and make room for progressive reform from the inside. And I'm not sure how to get there, but there's plenty of examples where the non-Amish community is condoning and promoting and encouraging this regressive uh, behavior, and that's a place to start. You know, my
Well,
favorite hobby horse, Wisconsin versus Yoder. It's a topic for another time, but the outside world was complicit. They were actually the people that made that happen, and 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 so there's dramatic costs to that, but it's not just the Amish people's fault.
it's also it's also the communities around them, because like for instance, like people in my case, like they suspected and then told me after the fact that like they didn't report it because they had to maintain their relationship with their Amish neighbors. And whoever feels like that is the appropriate response, you need to like seriously take a look at what you're doing, because you are part of the problem. For reals. I'm not playing. Like, this is not okay. This is, I believe, like, this is the same reason that, like, that situation in Missouri earlier this year happened with Daisy. For example, the 12, 13-year-old that was sexually assaulted by her brothers was raped by 4 of her brothers, and they only arrested 2 of the brothers in the community. Like, the parents weren't even arrested in that case. At a minimum, they should have been arrested. They knew she was pregnant. They did not report it. A 13-year-old, a 12-year-old cannot consent, and sex without consent is rape. And that community is complicit in it. Again, the communities are creating the situation, and it needs to stop. And there needs to be some kind of progressive reform from the inside out, like Elam said. What are you doing, Elam?
Your camera. It's not. Well,
What?
I also want to point out that the can you
Hey, you're cutting out.
I just want to point out that not only were those parents, what did you do? Dang. Well, if I could get this in yet, I just want to point out that not only were the parents and the prosecutor, or the, that community complicit in this situation, the prosecutor bent over backwards to get those 2 perpetrators that were brought to court that were charged. He tried to get them off, and so it's not just the Amish community that's in error here that needs reform. Hopefully that captured that.
Yes, yes, and you're absolutely correct. It's not just the Amish community; it's the entire society and how they interact within. Like you have the what the Amish call the English people, right? Or even inside of these plain people, you have like the outsiders. Like we're part of this, and you have the people outside the community that notice things that do nothing about it. Those people are complicit. They are literally enabling this predator's paradise to exist because they refuse to bridge the gap. They refuse to provide any form of intervention for children that are being hurt today.
That's a good place to stop, Mary.
Is it?
Well, I'm just saying that's a punchline that needs to stick in people's minds.
Well, they
And
need
you,
to bridge. Yeah. Go ahead.
well, one of the things that, and this is probably a subject, an entire subject for another time, is that there's this idea that the Amish are a separate and apart culture, and they aspire to that. But the reality is that they're just part of Western culture, and
There,
there is nothing that could, that's just the fact. They're just a part of us and of the larger whole, and we, if we just saw them that way, um, a lot of these problems would be a little bit easier to process.
well,
But people want to attribute them. Oh, they're a different culture, and so you don't criticize them and all this stuff. But that's such a pervasive idea that you don't criticize the Amish, that they have stopped evolving. There's no evolutionary dynamic, and so when things like their adherence to this 15th century ideology of spare the rod, spoil the child is literally killing people, there's no process from within to remediate that, because they're frozen, they're locked into this regressive ideology, and the outsiders promote, celebrate, and condone that. And that's something that can stop right now. We can change our behavior on the outside to not participate in this, celebrating this failed society. And I know everybody's going, oh my God, the Amish are wonderful and all this crap, but they have problems that need to be engaged with and processed and reformed. And when all we ever do is say, oh, we can't criticize the Amish, or it's not just the Amish, it's any community that has this fetish for religious freedom is a problem.
well, that's very true, and we're kind of short on time right now. But I did want to talk about that. What Elam is talking about is what I generally sum up as like romanticizing the Amish. And what they do is they take these plain communities and put them up on this pedestal, and they look at them as these pious, like, oh my God, they can do no wrong. And so when somebody says this, they dismiss these cases as like um, an isolated incident. These are not isolated incidents. Start researching. There are so many incidents that are happening within the plain communities in America today. It is unacceptable, and it needs to stop, and it needs to change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening and asking questions. And thank you, Judge Me Unforgiven, for sharing your Jehovah's Witness experience. It's interesting how that is very similar to the plain community ideologies of like spare the rod, spoil the child. Like, they just, oh my gosh, like I remember people taking the kids out in the washroom and, coming back with the kid crying in submission. Like Elam said, like just like they beat the submission into them or something like that, like break the will or whatever the words behind it is. But it's terrible that it creates these situations where children are dying, and it's not okay.
Children are being murdered.
They're being sexually assaulted, and nobody does anything about it to create lasting reform. Nobody. And on that note, y'all have a good Sunday.
Bye.